I swear I had something for this. I had an opener. I can't remember it for the life of me. But hey, it's me, BrandyBuizel. That's how I go by. You could call me Brandon. Not that any of you can actually talk to me right now, unless you want to write it in the chat. And I'm going to be going over absolute freaking magic, which is compositing. And specifically, I'm going to be going over clips from LUCKYBOY because that seems super popular, and I wanted people to come. I also have Bullboy here, who's going to help me by reading out questions and gasping in awe to fill the silence.
Ooh!
All right. Well, you're going to need to like up. You need to lower the latency there. Make it happen faster. So
when we sound like a monkey? Oh, sorry.
No. I mean, I do sound like a monkey sometimes. That's what my grandma used to tell me. So we're going to talk about compositing today. Right now, these are just like clips from my compositing reel of a whole bunch of things that I've worked on in the past. To me, compositing is sort of like the art of making things look good, which I don't know if it's a definition that a lot of people are going to agree with. But it's also something that you could do with any application. And I welcome you to ask questions in the chat. Bull is going to be checking YouTube and Discord to see what any of those questions could be. And I'm just going to answer them during this panel as they come in. We're not going to have a Q&A section. So yeah, that's going to be how that works. And the reason I bring up questions is because questions such as, can I do this in blah, blah, blah software? Or do I really need After Effects to do this? It's not really applicable because compositing is something that you could do in anything. Just like you could do with like mixed media. Compositing just does what you need to in the software of your choice. You could composite in Photoshop, even though it's a video. But I like to think of After Effects as like way more powerful than Photoshop for video. It's basically the tool that I use for almost everything because it can do almost anything. One time I tried programming a tic-tac-toe game in After Effects that you could play just because it's that powerful and it can do all those things. So let's get started and let's talk about like LUCKYBOY stuff because that's what everybody cares about, right? So here's just an After Effects project file. It's going to have everything that I'm talking about tonight in the panel. And this first thing that I want to show you guys is a clip that we posted on the LUCKYBOY Twitter a while back, which was sort of like an animation test to figure out the style of LUCKYBOY and how we were going to condense all these different mediums together. Also, I have a shitload of material to talk about. Like I have this many folders worth and about a third of the time to deal with. So we're going to see how much we can get done without bleeding into Stampy's panel, which comes right after. So this, also, you might not be familiar with how this looks. After Effects is highly customizable in its workspace. And this is just how I like to use and envision things. I like to be very efficient with my space. And I tend to work with a lot more layers than I do length of the layers. When I work on After Effects shots, it's usually pretty brief, short, couple-second clips, but I end up having dozens and dozens of layers. So I like to reorganize my workspace, and I encourage other people to do that too. I was watching the 64-bits compositing panel the other day, and they used the default workspace, which just like drove me insane because of how many layers they use. It's so much scrolling, and it takes up a quarter of the screen. Anyway, this first shot here is just like a test that we did, a test that I did in-house. It uses some 2D animation by our 2D lead Diley. It uses this 2D fire effect that's embedded into the scene. It uses these photo bash textures on buildings and then also 3D models. And it was just like to prove, it was a proof of concept to see what the whole film was going to look like and our entire compositing workflow. So we tried to put as many mediums as possible into this test to see what works. And for example, one of the big things that I wanted to test out here was getting Dom's unique gradient map palettes down. I wanted to try and like replicate that in After Effects so we could use it in motion. And I just did it with like this very simple stack to get the colors and personality that his work employs. I could go over the specifics of how this works. Like, for example, I'll take the original image here that's rendered. We also render out an individual glow pass in 3D, which is just the things that emit light get rendered entirely by themselves. And then I combine that together. I change like the exposure. It's basically, compositing is a lot of playing around and pushing buttons to see what works. It's a lot of playing around and not knowing what you're doing, if I'm being honest. But as you go on and keep doing stuff and not know what you're doing, you tend to learn tiny little tricks that build up over time. And that's what all my work has been, because I've been using After Effects for 12 years. So I'd like to think I'm an expert in it at this point. Hey, Bull, we got any questions?
We do.
Just general so far. I know I haven't gone over anything specific.
So All Puppy asks, did you and Dom get different panels to game the system and have twice as much talk about LUCKYBOY?
No, actually, initially, we both applied to panels without knowing that the other person was going to do a panel. And his panel wasn't going to be about LUCKYBOY, and mine was. And then I titled mine without LUCKYBOY, but he titled his with, and it confused everybody. But excellent question. Here's a little compositing bit that I did from this animation I did of my character Yanni. It's a stop-mo animation. It's something that it has a lot to do with LUCKYBOY because it's using real-life elements combined with digital CG elements, or even just photos that are tracked in with the camera. Like the first thing that we'll do usually when we're working on something is like we'll take out the screen in the background, which is super easy. You all know how to key a green screen because you've watched Twitch streamers. It's easy, but you want to be a little bit more specific when you're cleaning up something for a final rendered product instead of like your Overwatch highlights. Add in like a background sky, and I added in this like background environment to extend the desert. And I did this by repurposing other pictures I had taken of this set. And then I'll do something like this doesn't look good. This as a shot, you could tell it's fake, and none of this really feels connected, even though they kind of match with the colors. The sky doesn't feel like it belongs. And that's where we start to add like aerial perspective. You see there's this depth here with these mountains, this clearly stolen mountain from whatever photo website. And we add a little bit of like aerial perspective, which is just as things go into the background, air has a certain opacity to it. And so it gets a little bit lighter. And then like I'll add depth of field, which is just a little bit of camera work. So that way the things in the background that look like shit are a little bit blurred. So that way you can't tell that it looks as bad as it does. And then comes color matching and color grading. And so at this step, we're trying to make sure that these scenes over here and the colors of these rocks really blend with the stuff in the foreground. And it's a quick little step, but it's an important one of changing the subtleties. You want to transform them all so they meet with your base image, because the image that you have in real life is basically your gospel. It's where you want to hit. And once you get all of your fake details to match the real footage, if you apply any sort of correction on top of all of them together, they'll immediately feel like they belong together. And that's what I do. And now the scene goes a long way from where it started. And that's basically what we do with every single shot of LUCKYBOY to a much grander scale. Like, for example, this first shot. This first shot's especially unique because it had to be re-rendered about 3 times over. And it uses this live action sock puppet. So Lucky in the shot is 100% real. We shot individual frames of him moving back in space using one of our softwares called Dragon Frame. It's the stop motion software that most people use. It's what Leica uses. And it's not super expensive either. But we just took one picture after another of Lucky moving into the background. And when we do this, all we have to do is, we have this original footage where the person is behind a green screen. We also have this green screen sleeve set up. So that way anything that's connected to Lucky is keyable, which saves us a lot of time that we don't have to manually cut it out and take the time to do that. And then we scrub through and he does the camera move. But this shot's a little bit unique, and I want to talk about this. Whereas the camera move that is originally played is really choppy. But in the end, we have this really, really smooth result. Now, man, I feel like I'm going really fast. So I'm going to like purposely slow down the way I talk. So when it comes to stuff that is stop motion with Lucky, this shot is special because we didn't realize till after we had filmed it and packed up our stop motion set and our green screen and our lights that the shot looked like shit. He was very choppy and he started bouncing around and it didn't look very good at all. And I can show you what it originally looked like straight out of camera. And it's not great. Yeah, that's pretty bad. It's jittery. It's moving all over the place. It's not smooth at all. And in the background, it's very, very distracting. And part of the magic of compositing is to make no element distracting to the focus of your subject. And when your subject is the distraction, the shot's bad. And I didn't want to pull like a Black Panther final fight scene on this. And so I went to Google and I tried to figure out what tool I could use to fix this problem that we had. I could manually duplicate frames and then transform them and maybe fake it so that way the missing frames that we needed were suddenly there, or I could use a tool. I actually used AI, and it works really, really well. You know that shitty AI interpolator that everybody applies to anime that looks like utter shit, 60 FPS, and you can never like see a good upload on YouTube of the original just because you want to watch the opening? Well, I think it has a practical application when it comes to stuff like stop motion. It just makes the result smoother and nicer. And it's really good for us in specific because we didn't have time to shoot all those frames. And once we were done and our set was packed up, we had no way of reshooting this. And so it just came in as a little tool we could use to correct our mistakes. Everything that I'm using is a tool. I don't think it's cheating in any way, because why would it be? But some people do see it as like it does the work for you. I would never use AI interpolation to make an animation smoother that I was animating like by hand or something. But when it comes to stop motion, you have to shoot start to finish everything that you do. And you can only restart the process entirely if you want to do a shot better. You can't just insert something in the middle. It's not going to work. Because every tiny little thing in real life is just moving ever so slightly every time you redo it. And it would look more distracting if you tried to fix it like that. So we always shoot just from start to finish again. And since this is just footage that I had and we weren't able to reshoot it, interpolation. And it ended up looking great. Paul, you got any questions so far? Feel free to chime in whenever. You're also muted, my dude.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a couple. So we have Blaze Fox asks, is learning compositing a good way to improve animation skills?
No, absolutely not. It's not going to help you with your animation skills, but it will help you in the final presentation of that animation.
And All Puppy asks, do people interpolate stop motion often?
No, actually, I don't think people do it enough. So the application I'm using is called Flow Frames. It's very accessible. It's 100% free, and it's really awesome. And I don't actually see people use it online for stop motion almost ever, which is almost a shame because it feels like it's built for that. It's the perfect blend between animation and real life. And it's also very easy to use. You don't even need like a super good graphics card. All you do is add in the footage, drag and drop, say how many times you want to duplicate the FPS. So if you want to go from 24 to 48 to 96 to 192, and then you just hit start, and 12 minutes later, you got your footage. Highly underrated. Something else that we did in this shot here is we originally shot it without these walls on the side. When we planned it out originally, we were supposed to have these walls come in on either side to frame Lucky in. And you're going to be seeing this image a lot, by the way. This is how we planned out each individual layout in the cartoon. And to define what mediums were being used in every shot. It was just a way to stay organized. We wanted these walls to come in and frame Lucky, but the walls that we had looked terrible. They looked like this. And they didn't really belong in the shot at all, and I didn't like them very much. So after the shot was already rendered, I went into the same blend file scene, because we're working in Blender, and I deleted everything in the scene except for the guitar and the camera move, and I modeled out this windowsill exactly where it's supposed to be in the original shot. And so this is two different renders that I've now had to combine together, moving in and out in space here. And part of the reason I had to redo it is because we also had this render of glass in front of Lucky and the rest of the street, and the glass kept rendering out with these speckles and highlights that were just really ugly. So then afterwards, I had to go in. I also made a fake wall of glass. And so these are 2D elements that are being comped into this 3D scene, even though the end product, they look totally fine together. And that's just like the magic of using different blending modes or opacities. I went ahead and I really wanted this to feel like it was a stop motion set, and there was like big fingers on everything. So I started off the shot by importing this simple, well, it's this simple texture of fingerprints using a fingerprint brush on Photoshop, and just speckled all over the place. And then I decided to up the contrast so that way there were some nice highlights. and then there was nice low lights, so that way it's really transparent and easy to see through. I had this thing called a light sweep, which is what you think of. It's like glare on sunglasses. Make it a little bit more intense, give it a second sweep. Then I edit the contrast again because I realized when I was working on the shot that it wasn't showing up enough. It was way too subtle. And so then I increased it. And you probably can't see this on stream, but it added this like big fingerprint over here and a couple ones over here, which is really nice. And then I just took it slightly out of focus. When you take it away, the street gets a little bit bleh. And it gives kind of like this nice haze over everything in the background, almost like the sun is shining into this corner and reflecting off. I hope you guys would agree. Also, when I'm doing everything, I talked about this earlier with the Yanny shot, but when I like to piece shots together with real life elements or 3D or 2D, they end up looking like shit together, or not very good at least. Like, for example, if I take up all the things that are making Lucky look good, he ends up looking pretty bad. He's very yellow. He doesn't match the lighting of the scene. It's just not great. And his blue is not very pronounced at all. It actually looks kind of purple, which wasn't good. And so I'll just like take the time to color correct him by adding in a couple different effects. So I just want to correct the color on Lucky. And the next thing that I did is, well, the keying process to Lucky isn't super kind. When we take him off the green screen, it makes this really smooth, gross edge. And it feels fake. It feels like we keyed him from a green screen and he's not in the scene. And a little thing that I did to add to it, so that way he would feel a little bit more at home here, is I would just spike up the sides of his body just a little bit. And it added this kind of like feathering and hair that a natural sock has. And you see, like, it's got this feathered edge now, but it kind of feels like it's stringy, like someone's pulling apart a fabric. So before, after, and all these small details sort of add up. Once I get everything to look sort of cohesive, even if it's a little bit ugly, that's when we get into like color correction. And so I have this first stack of color correction over here where I wanted to level everything and get it even more gray. It's almost like you have to take a step backwards to move 2 steps forward, just so that way they all feel cohesive. Like, for example, if you're out in a very orange desert like Yanny was, there's 2 different levels of orange to focus on here. So you have the actual ground here, which is like this reddish, purpley orange. It mixes all those hues together. And there's the bright orange of his jumpsuit. They're very stark and different than each other. And you want to make sure that when you get to the color correct stage, the subtleties that matter, like these 2, stay different enough while still belonging to everything else in the background. So when I was building this background, I tried my best to make sure that the rocks up here were matching the ground more specifically in those tones of orange than I would Yanny over here with his jumpsuit. And that's basically the same principle here, is I'm taking the tones away from this side and the red of the guitar, and I'm increasing the blue tones on everything else so they feel more cohesive. And then I could just add the rest of my color correction stack, which is really hard to explain now that I'm thinking about it. Man, I wish I had 3 hours for this. Be very uninteresting, though. Hey, Bull, hit me with a question.
Right. So, what would you say is the toughest thing to do in composition? Asks Brecky.
Toughest thing to do is LUCKYBOY sequence 4, shot 4. You might know it as this one. That's taking just a second to load. It's easily my least favorite shot, and I ended up not even working on it until Christmas Eve. That's right. I was working on LUCKYBOY all the way up until it got released. This shot looked absolutely horrid before, at least Christmas Eve, because Lucky was just a puppet at the point. Lucky looked a lot like this. And this doesn't look very good in your scene. It's not great. It doesn't feel like it belongs. And when he moves around, it doesn't feel right. So something that I had to do here was reinvent how I was able to match Dom's photo bash backgrounds. He does this thing that's super unique among creators that I'm aware of, where he creates these awesome little palettes. Let me see. It's in a folder somewhere. Anyway, yeah, he makes these awesome little palettes, which end up being these photo bash backgrounds. And I know what the key values of this background is. And actually, when we started LUCKYBOY, we wanted every shot to look like this one. But I thought it might be visually too much, and I didn't have time for it. But I wanted to do Dom a favor, and I wanted to make sure that this shot reflected that. And so that this one would meet its standard. And so we take our ugly little LUCKYBOY here. And what I would do is the same process that Dom does when he is photo bashing is I posterize Lucky so I have unique clumps to work with. And even though it's really ugly, these values are different enough that I can now recommand them to be something else using another effect like CC Toner. And all I did was color pick his background that he was using. And immediately he feels like he belongs. It's not too bad, but we can do better. The next thing that I'll do is I'll go in and I'll give him this nice rim, this nice highlight, so we know the direction of the light's coming from. And it separates him from the background, and it keeps him feeling like he's in this foreground. We also added in this shadow here. Something that's super nice about After Effects is that this shadow's in 3D space. You're fully capable of doing 3D shots in After Effects, which is super nice. And I don't know if that's in most compositors, whereas compositing softwares like Nuke, they tend to base more about like rotoscoping, keying things out, adding light bleed and color, whereas After Effects does literally everything. So I don't have to go to another software to do these processes, like add this 3D shadow that I just slam onto the ground. I tried to match what the ground plane was, skew it a little bit to influence where the light is, and then I also animate it as he's walking over to the right. The next thing that I want to do with like Lucky here is his hat is super iconic with that logo that's on it, but you can't see it at all when we do this posturization process. It's just completely gone. And so the next thing that I would do is restore specific colors, like the red over here and the red on his stripe at the bottom here. Because he's not two blue stripes, he's a red and a blue. It's about like visual clarity. You want to make sure that you're getting all the information out to the viewer. And then very specifically, I take the yellow from his hat. And I do this just by an effect called FL-HLS selection. There's tons of effects that do the same thing. But what it does very specifically is it allows me to pick out a singular color that's on the screen, and it keys that out specifically. It's very rough. It's not very good for stuff like green screening, but this effect has found a niche in being useful for this one specific shot for me. And so then I bring that back in, I add the pepperoni colors, and suddenly Lucky feels like he belongs in the shot again. I actually did something very similar when it came to his guitars, except I used actual photos of a Stratocaster that I had taken in different physical positions. I have a whole library that I had access to of a friend's guitar that I was able to just like position in whatever angle I needed for the shot specifically, and I didn't have to like do anything in 3D. Huge library. So I would just cut out a Stratocaster photo, and I would bring it into the scene, do the posturization process, and then it would fit in with Lucky.
Speaking of guitar,
yeah, what's up?
I think they deleted their question. Well, someone asked what the model of that guitar was that.
Oh, this is a Fender Stratocaster. We also have a 3D model of it that we made. This is supposed to be like the nicest guitar that there is. It's real classy. Anybody who's like a guitar person knows this is like the Drake Bell guitar. Like this is the default cool guy guitar. And so this is the one that Lucky's always been after. And then we have the less enthusiastic Jazzmaster guitar, which is a little bit more beat up, and it's not as iconic of a design. It's a little bit cheaper overall than the Fender Stratocaster. And it's also, this is a tiny little thing that we added, but Squier is a brand that it's much cheaper than Fender, but it's a brand that Fender bought so they could have a low-level line of their better guitars. So this isn't something that you'll like catch upon first viewing, but even the stage guitar that he uses isn't a very good one. But it doesn't matter which guitar you use, because that's what our story was about. It's not about the guitar. But yeah, so we have a Fender Stratocaster, and then we have a Jazzmaster. Very similar. Let's delve into a shot that I know a lot of people are interested in. This is the nice little break. It's like the Ghibli movie breather point of Lucky Boy. It's where you get to slow down. Dom and I realized that the movie was pacing way too fast, and we needed a scene to really develop Lucky's character as well as keep the pacing nice and chill. And it also added almost a minute to the total runtime, but I think it was worth it. And a lot of people like this sequence because Lucky's so relatable talking to his mom here. Now, when the scene was created, Dom actually did most of it himself, which was awesome. But there was a couple things he needed me to do, and there was a couple like areas where I thought I could plus this shot. And you might notice at the beginning, there's this sort of Game Boy Advance NES loading where it in stepped fashion, you get more colors before we get the full color range. And so what we did there is limit the palette the same way I showed you with Lucky is with this one layer, I would then posturize the shot so that we had like nice chunks of nice chunks to like break up the shot into. Nice fat color chunks. So break it up so there's like these nice chunks. We'd recolor it to be the one that we need. And then we'd let it play for a little bit. And then I changed the color to the next palette we were working with. So we started really dark. This is an effect that you'll see a lot in stuff like Mega Man, where they have to cycle through the color palette to make this unique fade. It wasn't intentional. It was more of a limitation of their medium, but I wanted to replicate that here. And so I took this limited palette that Dom had given me, and I tried to recreate the shot as best I could by cycling through them and slowly brightening up until we got to our full color palette. Something else I did in the background to make this change a little bit more significant is I actually changed the frame rate of the footage of the background. You'll notice here that the buildings move kind of choppy at the beginning, and with each color change, they speed up. And it's not that they're speeding up, it's just that their movement is smoother. And I thought it was like a nice subtle addition to call attention to what we were doing there and make it feel like the animation was increasing in both resolution and fidelity as it loaded up. There was a mistake in this shot, though, that I had to fix. You may have, if you were around for Dom's photo bashing panel, you would know, for example, that he likes to take things from Sketchfab, especially if they're free. And I found out he took this model of a subway train from Sketchfab because he left in a little bit of a mistake in the corner of the screen here. He left in the Sketchfab settings for viewing. So VR, share, what resolution model, full screen. He left those in. And so we just, like Photoshop, we could paint it out with a content-aware fill. After Effects actually has a content-aware fill tool that animates. And so all I had to do was draw a square around this little area that was a mistake and let it process for an insane amount of time because it needs to process every frame of the animation. And boom, it's mostly fixed. I could manually fix it and take the time to do that. But I had a lot more priorities with shots, and this looked good enough that nobody noticed it. And so off in the corner, it actually looks like it's just a smudge on the ground. So compositing doesn't have to mean that you're making something perfect. You could just be fixing mistakes. Or making something slightly cooler. What else you got for me? Bull, my boy.
Yeah.
You got anything else for me?
There are no new questions. You guys gotta start. I want to see that chat filled. We need more questions. Brandy is
there are a
dying.
couple questions. The interpolation program is called Flow Frames. Toughest thing to do in composition. Oh, you went over that one. And what was the name of the software? Stop Blend? What? I don't know what that means.
I wants to know what the hardest scene was. Lucky.
I think the hardest scene for me was definitely this one that I was talking about earlier. Just because it was so daunting for me for the longest time. It seems really simple, but the actual execution of it, those steps that I listed out to you, was through rapid experimentation. I had to slowly figure out on my own how I was going to accomplish the look. And I was basically flying blind. It's a lot of trying out effects, seeing how they play out, going back and then trying something else, and merging what works together. So that was definitely one of the harder ones. This shot was actually surprisingly easy in comparison because it uses a lot of the same techniques that's going on in the previous shot. So this is sequence for shot 5. It's also the one where Palo plays a hobo. And I had this beautiful 2D animation that was done by our animator, Noah. It's absolutely stunning. And what they did is just animate Lucky in perspective with the background that Dom had given them. So I had a really easy time with this. But we wanted a little bit more from the shot. So we plan out every single shot using these storyboard layouts, and then we color over what different medium is going to be in the shot, so we know ahead of time and we keep track of what assets are done versus not done. And we want to add this hobo as like a live action element. He was actually a character who was in an earlier storyboard where Lucky actually gave him a slice of pizza, and we were showing that he's friendly to the homeless. But we thought for a nighttime shot, it's more likely that he's startled and he's trying to make it home safe. And so we wanted this guy to look like really messed up and beat up. And he was actually pretty easy. We recorded a bunch of footage of just a real ass puppet sitting in the corner. He was basically in the same perspective because we knew what the background looked like. And we were able to line it up. We got a green screen on the chair over here, green screen on the wall. It was fairly easy to comp out and key up. You'll also notice that the paper that's covering him is the LUCKYBOY script. We just printed it out and slapped a bunch of highlight marks all over it. And then we just did some performances. He's got the classic Palo fro, because that's who it's voiced by. And then when it came into keying him into the short here, I just cut out the arm that I was performing his actions with. Just cut it out really roughly. It didn't need any like specific keying. And then we keyed this one section that remained in the shot while he was moving. Once that was done, we can then start coloring him. So this is him properly keyed. And I also did some warps. I used deformers to make it so that way the paper that I had jutted up with my arm would be nice and flat on the ground like it should be. Otherwise, you could tell that my arm's missing. And then we did the same exact process as before where we posterize his result. And then we just recolor the tones as we see fit. And then, boom, he's embedded into the background nicely. You can see this barrel here is actually familiar. It's from that early test that we did in Blender. I actually reused the exact same fire animation that we had created. And we just slapped it onto this barrel, cut out everything else in the scene, moved the camera, and rendered it out. Which made the shot pretty easy overall. The last thing I needed to do was animate this 2D shadow, which was also not that hard. I just manually went in. Anytime that 2D Lucky here had moved, I would also move his shadow. And it was that simple. To make the shadow feel real, though, this is a little bit of a compositing step, but if something's 3D and it takes up a 3D space, but your shadow is, say, flat, it's going to be really obvious. Your eyes are much better than you think they are at pointing out mistakes. You'll just inherently know that something's wrong. So I just took the time to make sure that as I was creating the shadow, it warped around the hobo here and the contours of the hobo rather than just calling it a day and letting it cover the entire hobo for a couple frames. And I think it lends to the authenticity of the scene.
He has a pretty good question. Wants to know, what would you say the top things you'd want to showcase in a compositing reel?
The top things you want to showcase, well, it depends who you're applying to. Like, for example, I'm applying to compositing jobs almost all the time because I want to work for a studio and do that. But it's not the easiest to apply to everybody with one blanket reel. For example, some studios that do 2D animation, they won't give you the time of day if you show them any compositing that's not 2D. So you kind of have to specify your reel for the specific things you're doing. Like if you're compositing real life footage or stop motion, they don't care. In fact, what they care about is way simpler and easier than you think it is. For example, in the shot, in the freezer, this is a really, really simple shot. That's why there's so few layers. We rendered this background animation of just the camera moving around subtly. We could even have done it with a single frame, but we decided to animate the camera in 3D space. And then in the foreground, we have this 2D character, a simple rim light, and a slight color gradient towards the bottom. And this is honestly what a lot of 2D studios are looking for. But if you show them live action stuff, they'll be like, oh, do you understand what we need? And you'll pretty much just get written off because of it. So if you're applying to a studio for compositing, or if you're developing a reel, you might want to make sure that the reel is reflecting what that specific studio you're applying to wants in their cartoons. That's probably what's the most important. And the thing is, I say that this is easy, but this shot can easily look incredibly bad. Compositing is not the easiest thing in the world. In fact, here's the original version of that frame. See, it's slightly worse, and you can almost tell why it's worse, but it's hard to describe. It's worse because there's these hard, dark blotches that are trying to create this 3D depth to this 2D Lucky, but I wasn't liking it that much, and it wasn't fitting in. It's almost like there's a drop shadow on him and a drop shadow on the background right around him. It's kind of ugly, and it takes you out of it. And then I decided to accept the flaw and go, no, in this shot specifically, this Lucky is straight up two-dimensional. That's what he is. I know it's a 2D drawing, and let's just treat it as that. Give a very subtle gradient of color at the bottom here to show that it's slightly darker. Hit him with this rim light because there's fluorescent lighting up above, and pretty much call it a day. It's easier than you think. Sometimes you can overthink it and make a shot look bad. So compositing isn't all just like adding extra layers and work and stuff. I ended up having to take away all of the layers I did here and replace it with two simple things, and it sold the shot. Compositing is a lot of thinking. This was also a pretty difficult shot. These pipes here, I wanted to make them look real, and the only way to do that was to actually use real pipes, but that's expensive. So what Dom and I did was bought a bunch of PVC pipe from Home Depot, and we spray painted the crap out of it. We tape over sections, spray over these little striped labels that plumbers like to do, or city workers who are trying to identify what could be flowing through this pipe. And then we'd age it using paint brushes, and we would just like add little aging crevices of rust to sort of give it a little bit more personality and duration of use. And then when we were done with that, we would take our time and shoot it up against the green screen. We actually, and this is a stupid thing, Dom almost didn't let me do it. We could have taken a singular photo and then cut it out and just panned it along. But I thought it'd be great to get the sort of 3D depth of these pipes moving in physical space, which makes it feel authentic and real when the camera moves and you see a subtle rotation of the pipe as certain objects get further away. And so I would hold it from one end, Dom would hold it from the other. This is probably the best example of it. This pipe has a lot of depth to it, and it looks kind of flat from this angle. They all look kind of hunched together, and then as it moves over, they spread out. And that's just a 3D effect that you're not going to get by calling it a day and taking a singular photo. Very skinny and weird, and at the end of the shot, it's nice and expanded the way it's supposed to be. And so that's something that we did over here with this pipes sequence. The bottom here, it's just a 3D animation with our mocap Lucky. He's just acting through the bottom there. And then in this composition, we have the pipes, which I recolored the same posturization process as earlier because I'm reflecting Dom's style. I also added this slime from this free slime FX pack that Video Copilot produced. They took a bunch of industrial movie magic Hollywood slime, and they just took it against the black screen and poured a bunch of goops and let it react. And then they uploaded it as free stock footage, which is super awesome because that slime is expensive. And so I made this pipe a little bit slimy. These are separate pipes that I took the best takes. They move through the 3D space, have that nice parallax that I was talking about. And then our 2D lead Diley animated this cute rat. What was difficult is because these pipes were moving in 3D space, I actually had to do a camera track. So there's a couple little nulls here, which is just me tracking a singular point on this specific pipe and parenting the rat to it. So that way, whenever he moved exactly as that pipe was moving.
Let's see. We got another question. Lecture EPS asks, what do you think is the most innovative scene or one where you thought you can never do, but it turned out better than you expected?
Oh, best example. There's this one scene that absolutely kicked freaking ass. And I'm super proud of it, actually. So it's a very ambitious shot. It's this one. And I always knew it was going to be difficult. But I ended up pulling it completely out of my ass. We wanted this to be a shot during the battle that consumed every single medium that LUCKYBOY had to offer. We had 2D character, 2D effects, 3D model, live action hands, stop motion puppet head, and then a fancy background and who knows what. And I actually pulled it off fairly early on, which made me a lot more confident about working on the rest of the film. And it's this one. Absolute, classic. I love it so much. We have these beautiful 2D effects that were animated by hand by our friend Drew. We have this bodysuit footage right here in this composition. We just have somebody playing guitar. They're playing the guitar. We got their hand. And then I had one of my awesome assistants. I didn't do everything alone. I composited alone, but sometimes there was tasks I could hand out to our other producer, Amanda, where she would then key out the person's body manually by rotoscoping them. And this is the result. I basically asked her anything that I don't want to see, that's colored in black, and anything that I do want to see in the shot, that's colored in white. And we're able to separate the two by using something called a Luma mat. And so she creates a Luma mat. I tie this footage to the Luma mat, and that's what's keyed out. I use the strap as a good separation of where the Lucky head should go, because it's a nice, clean, hard border, and it was a lot easier than, say, attaching it here. This would be a lot more difficult. So I just faked it, and I went, there. We also had a bunch of Lucky heads that I had to work with, but none of them were totally in the right perspective. And then we have this one. He was just grooving, and I was really liking it. So I just slapped the head on and keyed him out. I also added a couple little extra details. So the Lucky head is a different hue than the bodysuit. This is something that you won't notice, but when you cast shadows on certain objects, sometimes they have a little bit of a blue hue, and sometimes they have a little bit of a yellow hue. You'll see that this one has a blue shadow that's being cast by the guitar, and then you have the sunlight here, which we just faked and pretended was the lights on the stage. And then we have this bounce light from the ground that's reflecting up. And because the sun bounces out mostly warm light, that's what's being caught at the bottom here. But completely in shadow, the suit looks very blue. This Lucky, he didn't look blue at all. He's kind of yellow. And so just what I did is I took this bottom half of Lucky and I forced it to be blue, right under the chin. I animated this little scribbly line that would follow underneath his chin very loosely, but just so that way I could change the hue to be the one that I needed. And now it was blending a lot better in with the bodysuit, but it wasn't totally perfect. And then just a little bit darker, right in that one spot near the neck strap. Because it's kind of weird if the neck strap is right next to a highlight when it should be casting a bit of a shadow. Pop it out into the scene. We have this nice wobbly 3D background. It's just a little bit of camera wobble in 3D space. Super simple. But I made the camera wobble match the movements of Lucky because I had this stop mo footage to work with and this live action footage to work with. And since I couldn't change those, they had to dictate everything else I did. So the background was done afterwards. And I matched the movement of the background to the way that Lucky was jamming. So it looked like he was kind of orbiting around it the whole time. Then we slap on those 2D eyes, slap on the 2D effects, and then I slap on a couple other things. So this is what it looks like with all the pieces together, but we still have to do that step where you make them blend as if they're in the same shot together. They still look like pieces. And we do this by color correcting them all together as one whole. And I'm actually using a thing called a LUT here. It's called a LUT, or a lookup table. That's what it stands for. And it's basically a way that I can create a color correction once, or I could download somebody else's color correction, and I can reuse it anytime I want with one simple effect. These are actually a bunch of LUTs that I created in the past, and they were a way for me to quickly see how I can make it look super, super good. You can download LUTs online. I personally don't like it. I like to make my own color corrections, but the advantage to a LUT is just having it be that one effect, rather than having a whole stack of different things happening to create an effect.
Kit, let's see. Maya's got a question here. It says, how do you do the scene where Lucky is walking away, but the puppet master was in the shot but edited out?
Oh, that one. Yeah, so this one's fairly straightforward. This is actually the shot at the very beginning of that sequence. So he's not walking away with the pizza. The pizza was actually a it was a box that we shot in stop motion, and I just kind of bounced it around on screen, so it would have that nice stepped animation effect to match with Lucky's puppeting. But it was just that simple. As we keyed out the background, but we left in the puppeteer. And when the shot was completely over, and you see the media offline screen, I just took a screenshot of when Premiere does that. And I overlaid it to be exactly the shape of the puppeteer for that couple frames. But what we do here is with the 3D scenes is we export them using a depth matte. And depth matte is just basically the closer it is to the camera, the closer it is to black, and the further it is from the camera, the closer it is to white. Because this is an indoor scene, it doesn't get very far from the camera, so we don't get all the way to white. But the stuff in black is very starkly different than, say, the counter that this character is behind. And we want Lucky to feel like he's embedded in the scene. And one thing that we can do is just put him behind these chairs. And it's as simple as taking this depth matte, adding a bunch of contrast to it, and using it as a luma matte, just like we did with the guitar player. And it's very easy when you export it in 3D. All we have to do is export it twice. Once with the full color and everything, and then once as a depth matte. And then they have the exact same animation throughout. Same wobble, and they match up perfectly. Depth mattes are pretty magical.
Maybe has another really good question. Says, assuming you've worked with Toon Boom in your time at SCAD, how would you compare Toon Boom compositing compared to After Effects compositing, especially with the abundance of nodes?
It's weaker. It is weaker, but it does have advantages in the fact that it understands Toon Boom's individual strokes. I've actually dabbled a little bit in Toon Boom compositing as well, and we use Toon Boom a lot on this film as just 2D animation. But Toon Boom's compositor, it has a few advantages in the fact that it knows the individual layers of your animation, and it understands the individual strokes in those layers. Whereas when you bring it into After Effects, it's just a flat image. After Effects doesn't know what's going on. It just knows what it looks like at the end. So that's a couple advantages that it has, but the compositor itself is much weaker and less capable than doing everything in post like After Effects. Because then the sky's the limit. There's nothing that you can't do. But in Toon Boom, you have like, I want to say 60 total ways to transform the image. It's not a lot. It's a good question, though.
I have a question. I got a question
Yeah,
for you. What do you say is a good way to start learning After Effects? Like a good
Have a
starting
goal.
point. Small.
You need a goal. When learning literally anything, you just need a goal to focus on, because you can't learn something aimlessly. If you're watching tutorials or following along, I always find those very uninteresting for me personally. And I think the reason why is I'm not invested in the end result. Unless it's something I explicitly want to make, I tend to fall off. But if you have a goal in mind, like say a short film idea, and you know there's this one impossible thing, you don't know how you're going to pull it off, but you have a hint saying After Effects might be the key, you can take that opportunity to use After Effects to learn how to do that one specific thing right. You just need a goal in mind. I wouldn't make a goal as big as a film like LUCKYBOY, but if there's even a shot that you want to try, like for example, you want to make fire in the palm of your hand, you might be like, oh, that'd be super cool. Like I want to do this. There's a bunch of fire tutorials like that, but unless you have a specific goal or footage you want to use it on, you're not going to do it. It's why people love meme edits. People do meme edits and like learn how to do stuff like rotoscope just because they want to make a good meme. You know, they'll cut out Danny DeVito from Always Sunny and make an awesome meme out of it, but they would have learned how to do that if that wasn't the case. They wouldn't have just learned rotoscoping unless they had that specific goal. If you want to like follow a tutorial where you have fire in your hand, you might want to take it a step further and go, I'd like the idea of taking this fire in my hand, throwing it at my monitor, and then setting my monitor on fire. And you're like, all right, well, how do I do this? I need to break it down into steps. First, I need to figure out how to get the fire in my hand. And the second thing I need to do is figure out how to get the fire on my monitor. And then the third thing I need to do is find a way to blend those two things together. And now you have 3 goals that are manageable to start learning. And that's where Google comes in. You just start typing in those specific 3 goals and do them in the right order, and you'll have learned how to do it once. And then you can do that with any task. Goals are important. Oh, I like this composition a lot too. This is a very special shot where Lucky falls over and breaks a guitar. It's got a few different elements in it, and it was actually really simple to do overall. So the first thing that happened is we needed Lucky to eat shit. And that's why we eat shit composition. It's just this footage of Lucky falling over. We filmed him on just a green screen mat. We laid it out on the ground, and we just filmed a bunch of times of Lucky flopping over, which was step one. It was literally just this over and over again. I would curl him up, pick him up, and then we just drop him and see what it looked like on the phone. Just phone footage. And then in the end, we picked out the 4 best takes that we had. And we actually did this as a poll on Twitter where we posted it and we said, all right, tell us which shot to use. And this will go in the film. And the one that was picked was this one. There's a tiny glue piece under his hat so we don't have this needle prick the puppeteer. And it's used to block the needle. And it fell out and it kind of looked like a tooth. So we're like, oh, this is the shot for us. So we took that shot and I keyed out the green screen, which was fairly simple. It's not very hard at all. The first thing I do is I try to key it. And then there's a little bit of sloppiness over here. And then I'll go back and I'll change that color to be the part that's sloppy. I'll change the color to match the rest of the green screen. And now it just keys a little bit nicer. I find a lot of people don't do this step when green screening things. It's nice to like accept the faults of your green screen. Like this is too dark for it to understand it's the same color as this over here. The values are just way too different. And so I just fake it and make the computer think that they're the same value. And then I green screen it. I do a little bit of color correction. It's looking a little bit yellow, so I want to blue it up. I also want to fix this stripe. I have this very specific color in mind for Lucky Stripe, and I try to keep it consistent throughout. Add a little bit of color correction here, and I'm like, all right, it's ready for the next shot. But because Dom was holding the camera that we recorded this Lucky with his hands, it wobbles and shakes. And I was like, okay, well, this is going to be really hard to track onto a scene. So instead of tracking Lucky to the scene that he's going to be in, I decided to take out the green screen and I track specific points and wrinkles. I just track the little wrinkles all over the shot. And then I feed that information into a flat image that I rendered out of Blender. And so now this flat image is moving in 3D space the same way that Lucky is. And so when they move together, it just lines up. Then we add this 3D asset of a guitar. I recolored it a little bit. And I added this spotlight onto Lucky here to imitate the light that's above in the scene. That didn't get rendered out because Lucky wasn't there in 3D space. He doesn't exist as an object there, so I have to add that light in post and pretend he was. It's actually a very simple shot to do. And once I figured out how I wanted to do it, it only took me about 7 minutes, and I was already at the final product. And then the next step, I always add extra little color and make sure the scene is telling the story I want. I have this nice little purple vignette to really show that the spotlight is only getting so much. Street lights aren't that powerful. Oh, this is another good shot. Something very special about these 2 shots of Denver is he has these really cool hands. And they're actually photo bashed hands. These are Dom's hands doing the performance, and then I had him scribble over those hands. And you might be thinking, holy shit, are you telling me he seriously just like drew over these hands the whole way? Like every frame of it? Well, no, he didn't draw every single frame. In fact, for this entire animation, Dom only drew 3 hands. And that's because we're using another piece of software as a tool. Dom stylized 3 hands, or 3 drawings from this entire sequence here. And then we ran it through a program called EBSynth, which is this amazing tool that I highly recommend, where you insert this reference drawing and it tries to map your reference to the animation or the video that it's coming from. It's super good at what it does, and it's not even AI based, so you don't need a good GPU. You could download this right now and do it. You could add color to somebody's hair. You can remove wrinkles on somebody's head. It's really good at adding details onto something that exists, but it's not good at adding details where there isn't something. Like, for example, if her head was tilted this way and her nose was poking out, it wouldn't be able to map the mask onto her properly because there's a gap between where her nose is and the mouth, like a protrusion. It can only map things onto pieces that actually exist. So, like, for example, this here. This is absolutely beautiful and fantastic. It's a great use of EB Synth. But what it's good at doing is adding details specifically onto the person. It couldn't like add a baseball mitt or a glove onto this hand unless it was exactly wrapped to the exact hand's space on the screen. It's a little bit hard for me to explain, but I'm just going to assume that you guys get what I'm saying. It's a really powerful tool. And so I just had Dom draw a couple frames of it. We ran it through EB Synth, and we got this beautiful animation in just like 10 minutes. And now the hard part was just getting the rest of the shot to look good. Oh. How did you determine what kind of Lucky to use? Puppet, 2D, 3D, etc. That was very early on. I keep referencing stuff like this. And so early on in the storyboard phase, while we were still in pre-production, I took every single layout and storyboard for the entire animation. And I sat down with myself, my co-producer Amanda, Dom, and our 2D lead, and we just went in and highlighted each aspect of every single image in the entire movie to figure out what medium it was going to use, and we described what it was and why. It was usually to sell the joke or just what wouldn't be physically possible. Like, for example, it's really funny that an actual Lucky just eats shit. Like, we just throw him on the floor. That shit's funny. So we do that specifically. But then we'll have other shots where it's not super possible, like the pipes here. It's really hard for us to shoot this high angle on a Lucky puppet and have somebody masked out and green screen them away. So we use the mocap Lucky. So this one's dictated out of necessity instead of trying to sell the joke. We also have shots like this one where we feel like 2D Lucky can express a certain level of personality and shock that a stop motion puppet or a filmed puppet just couldn't. You know, sock puppets only have so much range of emotions, and having this 2D one, we can really sense how scared Lucky is while moving through the scene. So that's one of the ways that we chose. It was usually out of exemplifying a single joke or necessity.
Krampus asks, how would you go about adding motion/emotion to static pieces like masks and prosthetics?
Motion and emotion to static pieces like masks and prosthetics. Can I ask for a follow-up example from that person? I'm having a hard time picturing what they're trying to ask. But could you give me another one?
Let's see. I think that's everything. Let me think. Let me think of something for you.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I'm getting to everybody's questions if they have one.
Oh, all puppies typing. And then they stop talking because I put the pressure on.
But yeah, we always plan out shots ahead of time and what medium they are. Denver is also a sock puppet, and so like we would like to film him in stop mode, but we knew we wanted him to have a physical hand to hold this cigarette, and that's where EB Synth came in with the live action hand, so it felt animated. Every shot is planned. This is one of the storyboard panels that I did, where I wanted to make sure I incorporate a bunch of different mediums. It's the shot where Lucky is made out of sticky notes. And
we got a good question.
It's this cute little animation up here. For compositing's sake, he's really simple. I colored him like everything else that exists on the screen with one little difference. I also gave him a drop shadow. And the drop shadow is all you need to sell that he's onto this piece of railing here. So sometimes compositing is just that easy. It always depends on what the shot demands. Yeah, what's your question?
All right, so well, Rascal wants to know how long did it take to make Lucky Boy?
18 months. It was our senior thesis project, so we started in July of 2020. And well, we wrapped production, quote unquote, when we graduated at the end of May in 2021. But after we wrapped and everybody else like moved on, they were applying to jobs, they were dealing with their new lives, leaving school. I spent the next 6 months on my own compositing. And then in December, Ryan Storm joined me to do sound effects. And we did a little bit of a crunch in December to make sure we can make our Christmas release. So yeah, 18 months.
For what would you say is the average for depending on the shot you're doing? What would you say like your average session length is editing in After Effects?
If I have all the assets, I could probably get a shot done in 2 hours. So there's some shots that take a really short amount of time. Like I showed you earlier, the one where the Lucky eats shit. Once I figured out what to do, it only took me like 7 minutes, but it took me an hour to figure out what to do. Because the answers aren't obvious. I have to work backwards and go, well, this is the footage that I have. I have to be married to this specific footage. What else can I change to make this shot look best? And so after that hour of experimenting and planning, I figured out what I needed to do. 7 minutes later, I was done. And then there's other shots where I'll just spend absolutely forever overthinking it and trying to figure it out, like this one, where it took me maybe 4 hours once I had the idea in mind. But it looks really simple, so you never know.
What sort of movies, shows, aesthetics would you say did you reference in the making of Lucky Boy's composition style?
Uh, it's hard to say for the compositing style. Like I was mostly trying to marry the visuals to Dom's specific blend, but I always say that our biggest influences are Spider-Verse and Amazing World of Gumball and Scott Pilgrim. Like those are usually like the Lucky Boy influence. And then Mitchell's vs. the Machines came out, and all of our classmates actually gave us shit. Where they're like, "Hey, look, they're making your movie, guys. It's already out." That's a great movie. I freaking love it.
I
But
love Mitchell's Earth Machines.
yeah, it was very coincidental timing when it came out.
So we are in about the last 3 minutes. So stand by as we can answer a couple more questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, puppy's got to type fast.
Oh, this is an especially good shot right here.
Well, if no one asks anything, then feel free to ask your very long question.
Yeah. Keep asking your question. I'm just gonna go over this real quick. Where we have this Lucky sobbing, which
Here we
I
go.
love because it took me 30 minutes to animate the tears.
We got it.
Which means that the puppeteer had to actually hold still for 30 minutes and act out Lucky while I slowly moved each teardrop. That was a physical tear on him.
All right, all puppies questions dropped. I'm just gonna read out the question part. If you want to read out the rest of it, there's a lot of compliments there for you, Brandy. They wanted to ask, how do you even begin to get into this type of stuff? As in, what type of goals did you have in mind when you started learning compositing? Did you even want to do compositing at the beginning? And what did you have in mind when making something like LUCKYBOY? Did things change?
Okay, so the reason I got in compositing was out of necessity of other things I wanted to do. I had started learning After Effects a long time ago because I wanted to make an intro for my YouTube channel. And I was a Let's Player in 2010. And so I needed to learn it for that. And then After Effects could do more things. And it's not like I had a camera to film a lot of footage with, but when I got a smartphone, I suddenly had footage and I started learning how to color correct. And then I got really into like adding VFX into shots. And then I got into 3D camera tracking, where I could put in like 3D models into different things. And I was learning like 3D Studio Max, Cinema 4D, Maya. And I was learning how to put in 3D objects and 3D models into scenes. And then I learned how to do 3D animation so those models could move. It was really an organic flow of just curiosity. And then when it came to stuff like LUCKYBOY, I knew that I could make this film look awesome. And Dom had a lot of trust in me to do that. I should be talking about Dom's trust in me a lot when it comes to LUCKYBOY. Like, for example, this is the original opening sequence. I think you guys might be, if you've seen LUCKYBOY, you're familiar with how awesome the opening sequence is. This is how I pitched it to our class. Yep, it's 3 slowly moving images with burr at the bottom of the screen. But there's enough trust between me and Dom where the final product came out amazing just because he saw that and he went, yep, do it. Yeah, have fun. And then one day I sat down and we had this beautiful thing. It's just 3 images he gave me of the bus. We extrude like specific parts of the bus so that way it has a little bit of depth. We make the camera super, super shaky. You know, spin the wheels. We also have these little background elements, which is just from Google Earth, where I navigate Google Earth all across the city of Boston from location A to location B. And it's being reflected in the windows. And it's also emitting light, so it's influencing the light on the bus. And Dom didn't expect me to do any of this stuff, but because there was a lot of trust between us and he knew all the experience I had, I was able to just pitch this idea and come out with the end result in the end there.
Right. I guess this will probably be the last question if we're able to do it.
Sure.
Jamero asked, you talked a lot while not knowing a lot of things to begin with. A lot of times I'm the one who ends up being the compositing guy when I'm working with my friends, even though I don't really know anything about it, and usually end up doing things the wrong way. How do you stay sane and motivated while doing all that?
You don't. All right, what do you mean? How do you stay sane? Crazy. I'm working even though I really don't know anything about it and usually end up doing things the wrong way. I don't think there's a wrong way in compositing. You always end up with a look. Like, for example, this scene could have looked completely different. This is the raw footage that it came in, and I made it look like this. And it was really simple how I did it. I just applied all the knowledge that I had in the past, where I took this scene, I shoved this guy into place so that way he made sense to the camera, and he has this beautiful 2D animation. And then I do what I did before where I export a depth map so I could tell how far away from the camera he is versus the background curtains. And once I had that depth map, I was able to add things like lights in front of him or behind him. So this light goes behind him. It really fills out the screen here. And then we have lights that go sort of in front of him. It kind of dims him to the audience because he's being backlit. But without all of those things that I chose to do in my style, the shot looks like this. You could take this shot and you can make it look like absolutely anything else, depending on what your style is. I could do the posterize effect that we were talking about earlier and remap all the colors, but I don't think there's a bad compositing. It's just the look you ended up with you didn't want, you know? And if you have stuff to reference, you can start breaking down the specific pieces of why you like that look and start imitating them. I hope that helps.
All right. I guess that is Standpie's put the cutoff for questions. But Brandy, is there anything else you want to say to this big, beautiful audience here?
I wish I had 3 hours. I would have gone so much slower. I can't believe I forgot about this shot. It's a beautiful one, and I know a lot of people want to hear about it, but the truth is it's very simple. It's actually just a lot of subtle gradients here over my footage that are really selling this look. Like that's mostly what it is, and then it's tracked in place. There's only so much to break down. It's a fairly simple shot when you think about it. But I wish I had more time. Thanks for coming, guys.
All right, everyone, give a thumbs up in the chat. What do you do in a virtual panel?
Oh, not a clue.
All right, well, your own form of applause, I guess. What's up? Out of applause for BrandyBuizel.
You're supposed to applaud me, Bull. You're my hype man.
I am. Hold on, I am turning off
this.
A
little bit of this. Stay tuned. Standpie's going to tell you the making of something. It could be the making of that animation from the very beginning of the fest. It could be the making of this festival.
Standpie was there when it was better.
I personally hope it's not, because it sounds like twice as many spreadsheets as the first thing.